BeTheTalk, episode 348, featuring Deborah Heiser. Welcome to BeTheTalk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Debbie Heiser. Debbie, are you ready to talk?
I am. Thanks for having me, Nathan.
Debbie Heiser is currently an adjunct professor. She coaches individuals and families. She consults with corporations, and she's a frequent speaker and media expert in print, the web, and radio. Deborah is a relentless believer that mentoring changes others' lives. Your talk is called Rethinking, Aging, Mentoring a New Generation. Deb Heiser, welcome to the talk.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So again, it's Rethinking Aging, Mentoring a New Generation. I love this. You walk on stage and you say that, basically you hate going to parties because when you go to parties, everybody walks away from you because you're the aging specialist. You're the person that deals with all that. And it's not fun to talk about. It's not small talk. It's not good networking talk, and it was a pretty good opening joke. Please, Debbie, take us behind the talk.
Sure. Well, I wanted to be able to convey that when I go to cocktail parties, and this is real, most people are excited and interested to find out what people do. As soon as they find out I'm an aging specialist or I'm an aging researcher, their eyes glaze over. Their eyes dart around the room, and they're looking for anyone who can help them to escape having to talk with the most boring person in the world. And so that went over pretty well in the talk. I have to say it was unexpected, I think, from the audience. So it was the truth, and it went over well.
Well, and I would imagine it wasn't that much of a surprise for you that it would be a great opening line, get a nice laugh out of the audience, because we're not expecting it. It absolutely relates, and it's kind of one of those things. Perfect lead-in for you, because what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about, it's not quite a taboo, but it's something that a youth obsessed society like the United States and Western society and westernizing developing nations are more youth obsessed nations. So we're not going to talk about youth. We're going to talk about, getting closer to the great beyond. And so we all have a laugh about that. Is that something that you had pretty much banked on, bet on and put with that in mind, or was it more serendipitous for you?
Well, I wanted to use that, and I really felt good about it. And then the speaker coaches, when we had a meeting, said, "Don't do that. It makes you sound really lame."
What?
like no one likes you. And I said, "Let me keep trying it. Let me just keep trying it and work on it. I think it's going to work because it's real." And so I didn't think it would come off that way. But I think that when I was reading it in the beginning, it sounded really lame. But once I was able to actually speak it the way I felt, then it came across the way I wanted it to.
This is really important because, we'll get in the blitz round here in a minute about the actual process, what it looks like. But any solid TEDx organization that's been doing this for a few years, a lot of times they will have speaker coaches there, or who are volunteers, as not to be confused with paid speaker coaches or TEDx coaches who have actually given TEDx talks themselves and are there to help you, instead of kind of like a seller's agent when you're buying a house. You've got coaches that are there to kind of help the organization make sure that everybody is getting in line within the parameters, and then you've got the agents that are going to help you when you're buying a house instead of the seller. And it's kind of like that. You should almost have two sets of coaches right there. But I love how how it all worked out. I love that you had faith in yourself in that final delivery, that it was actually going to land. Do you think it was a little different when you started out? Did you read it? I mean, were you just kind of reading? Was the rest of it kind of, I mean, it's the first draft, so it's not an easy thing.
No, the first draft was awful. I loved it. And I thought, this is great. And all of my friends were very polite and said, oh, nice. But then the speaker coaches made it real. And so I just made it sound like they said, boo, go away with it. But they had to hear all the rest of the stuff that I was saying also. And I think that what they did was they helped me cull it down and take, you know, I come from a research background, so I want to throw in everything. So I think that what they did was they helped tweak it, and they made me go back and really look at it and try to make it as lean as possible so that it could work. So they did help. They were tremendously helpful. But in fact, they didn't like that in the beginning.
Well, and the funny thing is they didn't like it. You loved it. And the first draft is always tough. But talk us through the process that you just kind of trimmed back, you know, edited back your talk. It sounds like you had a script. A lot of the better organizations really require you to fit into their process as opposed to just kind of winging it and you know, having 5 or 10 different, you know, superstars that all have their own different way. The better organizations are really going to make you jump through their hoops, or else possibly be cut from the team that I've seen before you actually get a chance to talk, even though you're already accepted. What did that honing process and scripting process and revising process look like for you, Deborah?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll be quite honest. It was stressful for me because it felt very personal in a lot of ways. You know, when you're speaking about something or that you have an idea that you're passionate about, that you really feel connected to, when people don't like it or give feedback that's not positive, it felt, I had to look within myself and say, okay, what they're saying, there has to be something here. And this was throughout it. So they did put us through a process where they said, okay, here's the first draft. Then they said, okay, let's get it down. Let's take out every 3 sentences. Now meet with 2 people, meet with the group. It was really great because if I had presented what I came out with first, it wouldn't have been a decent talk at all. And I thought it would have been. And I needed someone to say, here's my perspective from somebody who's not in the aging field and someone who's not a researcher. You have to make it sound in a way that we can understand you. And they did that. But it was a long process, a weekly meeting. Well,
thanks for contributing and committing to the process. Let's get back into your primary, you know, field of expertise. A lot of people don't know this, but 20 years ago, I actually had a business and I would go into senior facilities and I would actually bring these reminiscence groups together. I do research on, you know, pop culture icons from their generation, from the 30s, 40s, maybe even 50s. Actually, I might have done the 20s back because this was 20 years ago. And it was just amazing how people opened up. And unfortunately, you know, that all came to an end when all of the senior living nursing homes started consolidating their budgets and gobbling one another up about 20 years ago. But it was just such a fun thing. You know, talk to us a little bit. I think what most people are interested in right now, Debbie, is making sure that we're taking the science that we know right now to make sure that we're not doing bad things to our minds and setting ourselves up for, you know, mental issues or dementia or things like that. What's the most recent science or things that you're up on saying about what we can do to prevent that? And then I'd love for you to kind of take over and tell us a little bit more about some case studies, your courses that you teach, your classes at university, and kind of summarize the work that you do, or perhaps start out with that and then answer my question later.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of research out now, and it's really changed in the past 20 years. What we do know is that and it's kind of more recent that people in the public know about it, but that is that we can expect to be happier as we grow older. This came from a lot of the research from the Harvard longitudinal study. It's a 75-year study that having meaningful connections lead to better, physical and emotional outcomes later. Laura Carstensen from Stanford has been looking at how we become happier as we get older. So her research out of Stanford, there's, a plethora of this, that we have. So the things that we really know now that are newer, that affect our physical and emotional, well-being, no matter what our state, is that being connected with others is truly immensely important. And research shows that across the board, not just Laura Carstensen's or the Harvard longitudinal study, but a lot of different researchers are talking about the same sort of thing in a lot of different ways. And that's new.
So our relationships are actually making us happier as we go on through life, even though relationships usually can make us really miserable if they are difficult relationships and if there's drama and if there all of those things. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice that it kind of flips at some point? Is there a particular age, or is it after retirement or after the empty nest, or what? Are there demarcation points?
There's meaningful connections are good always. It's not having a lot of connections. It's not quantity, it's quality. So I like to talk about it in terms of I call it the Ebenezer effect. This is just my way of talking about it, but you can, Ebenezer Scrooge from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol talked about how, I talked about how he had everything. He was a rich guy. He lived in a mansion. He had servants taking care of his needs, but he was miserable and no one liked him. And it wasn't until he had meaningful connections and that he sort of felt like giving back to others that he experienced joy. And that's exactly how it works in real life.
I love that analogy. That is great. Because, he did have a buddy. He had Jacob Marley, but then he died and he got all chained up. So he didn't have any companionship except for Bob. And Bob was secretly, disengaged worker who was resenting the working conditions. So he had to turn it around. Yeah. That's great, because the time of year that we're recording this is the season to be thinking about this. So it's absolutely perfect.
So that is in film in a lot of different ways where people hit this, and it's usually right around 50s, 60s that people hit this. It can be earlier or later for anyone. But this is where the arc goes up for happiness. And so this is really because we're at a point in our lives where we say, hey, I know who I am. Hey, I know I have skills and talents. I've been honing them my whole life. I've been taking care of these things, and I know what I'm doing. Now I've checked all my boxes. Now how do I make sure that I didn't just exist on the earth and my life had no meaning? So this is where this kicks in, and this is why we all have this kind of feel-good feeling that's different than when we're younger.
I love it. Well, we've been enjoying this conversation with Deborah Heiser, and her talk is called Rethinking Aging, Mentoring a New Generation. And we're going to be right back in just a moment with the Blitz Round. Hey, Talk Universe. I hope you've been enjoying today's episode with today's guest. But you know what? Many people want more than that. Many people that listen to Be the Talk actually want to give a talk. And if that's you, you're not alone. Listen to the rest of this podcast. At the end, I'll have a free resource for you just for listening. And we're back with Deborah Heiser. It is time for the Blitz Round. We're going to ask Deborah a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and performance of her recent talk. Deborah, are you ready?
I'm ready.
First off, were you invited to speak, or did you apply?
Someone told me that I should apply, and then I applied. But I had him as my sort of guide throughout it.
What advice do you have for the rest of us who are also trying to get accepted?
Have a passion. Talk about or pitch something that you're really passionate about, because that comes through really in a strong way as long as you have a passion.
Debbie, are you a memorizer, improviser, or a blender in terms of your preparation?
It was required that I was a memorizer, which scared me, but it was great that it was done that way in the end.
What's a tip, tool, or technique that actually helped you prepare?
Have a good social support network, someone or several people that you can talk to throughout it that will not shut the door when you talk about it endlessly, that will listen.
Were you an opener? Were you a closer? Or were you set in between in terms of the order?
I was 3rd out of 10.
What advice do you have for other in-betweeners?
While you're waiting, don't sit out and watch the audience. Or, try to go in the back. That's what I did. Try to stay in the back.
Don't do what I did. I love that.
And try to just relax and keep yourself in a place where you can focus on your talk and get yourself grounded before you go out.
So before you go out, Debbie, are you an introvert preparer, or are you an extrovert preparer, or would you describe it some other way?
I would say I'm an ambivert.
Ambivert, okay.
I'm a little of both. So I needed quiet time by myself, but I also needed to get out there and prepare on the stage beforehand several times, whereas others didn't need that.
Last question. What was the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or right before your talk?
I'd say that the strangest thing was getting mic'd up. I had never been mic'd up, and I was completely, they said, "Oh my gosh, you have so much hair. We're going to have to, we don't know what we're going to do with this." And I was like, "What? We're going on in a few minutes and we're having hair issues?" Like, I didn't, they were trying to like pull it back. And I said, "I'm going to look like a weirdo. You have to fix this."
So there's the Debbie hairstyle, and then there's the Debbie TEDx hairstyle, which is completely
kind of, my hair was like my usual hair.
Yeah. It sounded like they were suggesting, like they were trying to do something like really spontaneous with your hair, which is not, you don't want to be doing that when you're giving a TEDx talk. That kind of defeats the whole look thing, right?
So that was weird. Normally I would be like, whatever, but I was so focused on getting out there and had practiced and whatever that threw me. That was weird.
We've been enjoying this conversation with Deborah Heiser. Her talk is called Rethinking Aging, Mentoring a New Generation. If you want to watch that, you can go to our show notes page at BeTheTalk.com. We will have a link to it. We will also have a link to Deborah's website, mentorproject.org, mentorproject.org. And we're going to be right back with the final word of advice from Debbie Heiser. Hey, Talk Universe, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you want to give the talk to change the world, but you don't know how or even where to start, no problem at all. Go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted for my new 5-day email course that'll show you how. Absolutely free. Just go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted. We're back with the final word of advice with Debbie Heiser. What is it?
Prepare, prepare, prepare. You can't practice too many times. That's my word of advice.
Deborah Heiser, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Thanks so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Be the Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.